Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program, we're going to be talking about something that many of us may know of or have direct experience with, and that is that of chronic illness. Too often, people are led to believe that once they have a chronic illness, that they'll just have to accept their diagnosis. Doctors they go and consult with tend to be the professionals that seem to know more about what we do when it comes to something like this, and as they prescribe the myriad of medications to help us overcome symptoms, pain, things like that, to give us some relief, we begin to realize that that medicine cabinet seems to be filling more and more as we start feeling less and less ourselves. What then do we do? Well, the other question, too, isn't so much as that we think that we want to heal, but the question really is, do we really want to heal? And that seems to be the question that our guest here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is going to be sharing with us. He is a physician who specializes in pulmonary and critical care medicine, whose intellectual journey has taken him far beyond the confines of conventional medicine. And after completing medical school, he did his training in internal medicine at Case Western Reserve University and his training in pulmonary and critical care at University Hospitals of Cleveland as well. He has spent the career treating tens of thousands of patients and has realized the majority of patients with chronic disease just simply do not heal, a percentage of whom have no desire to heal. And this is what compelled him to dive deeper into the psychology of human healing. He has decided to write a book that tells us how we can begin healing from the inside out. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Nauman Naeem. Dr. Naeem, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Well, we're excited to have exciting conversations because, you know, the body is made up of a tremendous amount of energy, and when we're excited, it seems nothing can get us down, including being sick. What's going on here? Because what I was discovering what it was you do, and you're seeing a lot more of this progression when it comes to medicine and healing, you realize, you know, how often do people really hold on to what they have as though it seems to be sort of a crutch or an identity, if you will? What's really going on there?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, in my practice as a pulmonary critical care physician, you know, I mean, the whole reason I wrote this book and did this inquiry is because, you know, I've been interested in human behavior and human potential long before I became a physician. And when I, you know, finished my medical school and my training and I started practicing, I just noticed that, you know, people just did not get better. They remained stuck in the paradigm of chronic diseases and, you know, relying on more and more medications. And then, you know, if you look at global trends, you know, the incidence of all our chronic diseases are going up. Hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, amongst others.
You know, and it was interesting. Let me bring this up for you real quick, too, when you talk about that, because I was having a conversation. I was actually at a restaurant, and I was sitting up at the bar, just, you know, having myself a nice little Arnold Palmer and a little bite to eat, and I connected with this gentleman who happened to be, I live in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he was from Seattle, Washington, which is the general area. I was from Portland, Oregon, just recently moving down here. And we got into that conversation. He was really amazed at some of the progression that they had up there that I didn't see so much down here in a place that claims to be progressive, you know, because they got the driverless Ubers going on. They call that progressive, and I'm like, no, well, you don't have recycling programs there. You certainly don't have a bottle turn-in program. You just throw everything away, and I kept wondering, where does all that garbage go? But that being said, one of the things he was talking about is he says, this millennial generation is quite different in how they want to treat their yards. They want to actually begin planting gardens and getting back to sustainable farming practices. And I said, you know, I think that's such a great idea because, as we've talked about this many times on our show, it isn't just growing natural food, but when you have that connection with that world, that world in the secret life of plants actually returns the favor in a sort of symbiosis, if you will, because without plants, animals die. It's just that simple. And I said, you know, take a look at the chronic diseases. You were just talking about things like cancer, for instance. Why is that on the rise? And it's no hidden, mystery that, well, there's a direct connection of how disconnected we've become from that world, and it just all makes sense. Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah.
So actually, there.
no, that's great. No, I appreciate that. It goes a lot deeper. So, the incidence of these chronic diseases is on the rise, and I really started looking at, really examining. So why is this happening? Why are my patients not getting better? And I started applying, my interest in human potential to my work with patients, and I dive deep into literally 1,000 different books and publications on healing, consciousness, metaphysics, and that realm of writing. And my inquiry basically culminated in me writing this book called Healing from the Inside Out, where I attempt to dive deep into the roots of healing and what we truly need to do to overcome chronic disease. So that's how that book came about, just asking questions and trying to come up with answers. So, I can dive deeper into that if you'd like, or unless you wanted to take the conversation a different way.
No, I'm going to go ahead and let you lead. I mean, somebody who's basically helped heal tens of thousands, or you worked with many people, let's just say that.
Right.
I mean, we're talking, and you're a doctor, so... sometimes when you say, well, you're a naturopath, oh, well, that's not a real doctor. Chiropractic, that's not a real doctor. I'm not going to listen to this nonsense. But come on, pulmonary for crying out loud. I mean, that's heart stuff there. That's heavy duty. So we're talking to a real doctor, guys. So sit back, keep your mouth shut, get your eyes and ears and your intuitiveness open, and listen to what you got to say here.
So this is the thing about what I discovered about conventional medicine. The problem with conventional medicine and the way we are trained as physicians is that we deal with one level of who we are, and that one level of who we are is the physical. So if you look at all the treatments and all the focus in conventional medicine and modern healthcare, it centers around medications or pharmaceuticals, around procedures and surgeries. Now, I'm not saying that, patients don't need those things at certain points in their disease process. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is the problem is that we are only looking at the most superficial level of who we are. So when you look at the word healing, the word healing comes from the word whole. So healing means to become whole. And to just explain that a little more, what that means is, for me, is to cultivate and integrate all the different levels of who you are in order to create the optimal environment for your chronic disease or condition to be treated effectively. So when I talk about all the different levels of who we are, so I talked about the physical, which is what, we as medical doctors focus on, but then there's mental or the mind, and there's the emotional self, and there is the vibrational self, vibrational referring to energy. There's the spiritual self, or what some people would call consciousness, or being, or that aspect of ourselves that really animates who we are. So in my book, I dive deep into all these different levels of who we are, and in an attempt to cultivate all those areas and to integrate them. And then the other thing I discuss in my book is that I make a distinction between healing and cure. Cure is a term that's used in the medical community, and it refers to elimination of a disease process or a condition at the physical level. So I don't equate healing to cure, because the thing is that when you're talking about cure, you're talking about a specific condition at a specific point in time. But what you need to realize is that we as human beings are dynamic beings. Our bodies are always in a dynamic process. So, and healing is an ongoing process. It's not a static thing with a certain endpoint. It's an ongoing process. So that's so I make a distinction between healing and cure. They're not equal. Now, that's not to say that if you are on the path to healing or becoming whole, and you create that optimal environment, it does not mean that you will not be able to get to the roots of your illness. Certainly that's the goal of healing, and to optimize the treatment with a possible elimination of symptoms and an elimination of the condition. That's certainly possible, and that is, most people's goal. But I make a distinction between healing and cure, in that sense. So, I can dive deeper into that unless you had any specific questions about what I've said.
No, I'm actually enjoying the direction you're going with this because it really opens people's minds. I like that you brought the contrast of healing and cure. Okay,
right.
Cure means maybe you've ran that race and you're across the finish line, but have you truly healed? And I'll tell you why I bring this up.
Right.
We had a guest on the program who had actually survived cancer twice. And began scratching her head saying, this is really interesting because you don't hear conversations about people after they have, let's say, won the war on cancer, which is another disturbing piece of language that I find out there. Come on, a war on cancer? Do we have to be at war at everything? No wonder everybody's stressed. Change the language, change your life. It's just that simple. Anyway, but she said the reason there was such recidivism when it comes to cancer is because even though somebody has been, let's say, cured, and I actually know someone directly, as I talked with her about this, as she survived a breast cancer, actually, she says, I'm even more afraid now than I was as I had it. And I said, so what's going on there? And it was funny when we had this conversation because it was right around the time I was about to interview this guest. And the guest simply says, what you don't hear in conversations out there is, sure, they're celebrating the cure, that this person healed, whatever the case is, but now the person is more afraid of getting it again.
Right.
And I thought, okay, how do we overcome that barrier? And I could see where someone like you can be just invaluable when it comes to this.
Yeah, so let me dive into that actually a little. When it comes to cancer, right, oncologists, who are the specialists who treat cancer, will usually never use the word cure. Very rarely do they use that cure. What they use is the word remission. And what remission means is that that the person has been treated, whether it's surgery, chemotherapy, or radiation, and the diagnostic testing, whether it's X-rays, imaging, or laboratory testing, shows that they cannot detect any evidence of the cancer in the patient's body. So that's what the word remission means, right? So very rarely do they use the word cure. So it's interesting how this person who you're talking about had this kind of fear or anxiety around being cured, because the thing that I have discovered, because I do work with a lot of patients with cancer, mainly lung cancer, and I deal with critically ill patients who end up critically ill with a cancer. What I have discovered is that I have not met one patient who has cancer who did not have a deeper issue at some level, underlying their psyche. So when I talk about deeper issues, it could be a subconscious block, it could be a limiting belief, it could be a history of some sort of emotional trauma with an emotional block. It could be identifying with their life story. It could be feeling stuck somewhere in their life, or it could be they're in the midst of a tumultuous relationship, or they're under tremendous financial stress. So the common factor amongst all those is the response to stress, right? So stress is a major thing in our modern day society, and we're all dealing with it. And often we cannot take away those external factors that result in our stress, because we all need to work, we all need to earn a living, we all need to pay the bills, and we have families that depend on us and that sort of thing. But it's really how we respond to stress. It's our inner response to stress that really kind of determines what goes on in our bodies, right? So a lot of and the response happens at the level of the mind, at the level of our thoughts, at the level of our emotions, at the level of our vibrational frequency, what we're focusing on. So it's interesting, that story you just told, because, not knowing all the details, I mean, my guess would be that this person may have one of these underlying deeper root causes or issues that he or she still needs to dive into and uncover and address. So that's what I would guess, but I can't say for sure because I don't know the details.
Right.
But yeah. Mm-hmm. But I mean that's so. This is the thing. I mean, the remission. That's why they use the term remission, because. And if you ask an oncologist, right, about all these other things, about these deeper levels of who we are and how, being stuck at one of those levels, could have created the environment for the cancer to occur, a lot of them will look at you like they don't know, they have no idea what you're talking about, or they've never heard of this, or they think you're crazy, right? But, I mean, in my experience, when I've looked at patients who have cancer, I mean, there's always something deeper, a root cause that has not been addressed. And I think that any treatment for cancer, I mean, of course, in a lot of cases it will involve the surgery, the chemo, and the radiation, but you have to go deep within and find those underlying issues and causes, which oncologists are not trained to do. And there's a lot of cancer support groups, but not all of those do that as well. Right. Right. So I dive deep into this in my book, and not only in regards to cancer, but all chronic diseases. And I actually go into a 9-step process in my book, and I discuss it in quite detail. And I can get into that if you'd like, unless you had any questions about.
No, yes, please continue. You're doing great. It's just nice to be led in this direction, because it's taking one step at a time. And as you talk about how we're made up energetically, spiritually, we always hear mind, body, spirit, but as much as we believe we know what this is, when you put this into a realm of, okay, well, I believe I meditate, I believe in a God, I believe in religious practices and so forth, so why am I getting this? It almost seems like people feel shortchanged, like, I thought I was playing the game the way you were supposed to. And in fact, one of the biggest things we address on this program that we've had now going on 16 years actually is this. People say, you hear about this thing, this midlife crisis, it's almost become like a badge, and nobody ever says, though, what do they believe is why we think this, that we have this midlife crisis? And so over the years of doing the program, here's a consistency that certainly has emerged, that by the time you're approaching midlife, and we're talking about it could be as early as 35 years old, and in fact, tremendously enough, we actually have most of our audience are about 35 to 50, believe it or not. Okay. And that being said, so what has emerged for me as a consistency is this occurs because we've spent most of the first part of our life, we're talking from childhood till about 30, 35 years old, I would say, right? And we're doing all the things we thought we were supposed to do, what our parents thought what was best for us, our teachers were telling us we were supposed to do. You go into the world of work, you're busy actually spending more time seeking approval than mastery. Yes. Okay, and then finally you get to this road at 35, 40, 50 years old, and you say to yourself, you know what, I've had enough of this nonsense. You just know something inside of you isn't working, that you haven't fully unleashed who you are, what matters to you in the world because of all this approval and acceptance and all these other things. And it stands to reason you're going to have a crisis, because now all of a sudden you're buying into the chronological ideal of aging. In other words, I'm 50, and if I'm lucky, maybe I've got 50 more years left. Or they say the average life expectancy now, although it's increased to, 72 years of age for men, and I think it's 74 or 76 for women. I can't remember what it is offhand. So somebody at 50 years old is saying, now maybe I've got 20 years left. Okay. That being said, they now look at it and say, but 20 years doesn't feel like that much longer. You know what I'm getting at?
Right. Yeah.
So let's kind of go in that direction a little bit in relation to your book, Healing Within.
No, definitely. So you brought up some excellent points, right? And I'm going to dive deeper into those. So, the problem with how we grow up is that when we come into this world, I mean, we are basically born into like our true nature, our being, our awareness. That's how we come into this world, as pure beings of light. And what happens is that as we progress, we have all these influences and different experiences, a lot of them which are perceived as negative. I mean, we have our parental influences, which, I mean, are not always positive. There's like you said, the education, the teachers, and then there's also society. And especially now with the advent of technology and, instant access to information through the internet and social media, there are so many distractions that not only the average person, but even children are faced with. And all these distractions are on the outside. And they're basically telling us when we're younger, well, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to do certain things, you have to pursue certain careers, in order to be accepted or in order to become part of society. But there's no focus on the inner environment, right? There's no focus on our inner world. Everything is external. You can't even
hear your own voice, in other words. Yeah.
No, exactly. And then, like you said, like most people go through their lives accepting what other people have told them, accepting other people's, interpretations of how life is supposed to be. And at those ages you mentioned, like, 40s and 50s, that's when, we start questioning, what is really going on here? Like, what am I doing? And often it's a crisis that leads to that. It could be a health crisis, it could be a relationship crisis, it could be a financial crisis, or it could be a career crisis. It could be any of those things. And unfortunately, often it takes that crisis for us to kind of be stopped dead in our tracks and really look at how we've been living our lives and where our focus has been. And the first chapter in my book is entitled Your Illness is a Gift. And what I mean by that is that what illness does, it really is a signpost for you to look deeper within to see or to uncover or discover what led to the circumstances that allowed this disease process to manifest in your body. And that doesn't just apply to illness, it could apply to any crisis, that we face. And I'm seeing this more and more. I'm seeing crisis in people's lives at individual levels, at family levels, at societal levels. And if all you just have to do is turn on the news and see what's going on in our world, right?
Right.
So there's also global crises. And I believe that, what's happening in our world is a reflection of what's going on in each of us individually. And, the world situation is a reflection of the collective inner state of all of humanity, right? So you can see this not only at an individual level, you can see it at larger levels, at the level of humanity. So at some point, we start, now not everybody, some people just accept that crisis or that health crisis or whatever, and they continue to, live that paradigm. But a lot of people start questioning and start going within. And what I discuss in my book, you talked about meditation and mindfulness, right?
Right.
Often, when it comes to meditation, it's a wonderful practice, but it doesn't resonate with everybody, and not everybody is able to jump right to that. And I think the best way I can explain why is, I don't know if you're familiar with Ken Wilber. He's like probably one of the greatest living philosophers right now. He's
no, I'm not familiar
books.
with that name. And it was funny because I was just watching on YouTube. You know, I love YouTube because you can find stuff. And so Alan Watts was he was somebody I really enjoyed in my 20s. But anyway,
right. So Ken Wilber, he's written countless books, and he's like a modern day philosopher, and he's a teacher of consciousness. And what he talks about is that, like the whole spiritual movement that we have, right, is all about waking up. But he says that the problem is that you end up with a lot of enlightened neurotics, for lack of a better way of putting it, right?
I like the way you put it.
Yeah. So this is the thing. He says that waking up is not enough. You have to clean up, you have to grow up, and then you show up before you can wake up. So let me dive into that because I'm using his terminology, but it applies to what's in my book. You know, when I talk about cleaning up, what I talk about is looking at our mind. So you know, a lot of us suffer from the problem of negative thinking, and we suffer from subconscious blocks and limiting beliefs. Now, if you look at the human mind, it's divided into the conscious and the subconscious mind. The conscious mind is 5%, and the subconscious mind is 95%. And Bruce Lipton, who's written the book Biology of Belief, talks a lot about this in his book, that a lot of our subconscious behaviors are programmed in our early childhood by the time we're 7, and that's when our personality is formed.
Right.
So and a lot of that is dependent, is influenced by all the things that are influence us up until that point, not all of which are positive, as you know. So a lot of us grow up with these subconscious blocks and limiting beliefs. And just to apply this to health and disease, some of the limiting beliefs that I've uncovered in patients and clients are, you know, I will always remain chronically ill. I will never get better. Now that I have been given a diagnosis, that's one. Number 2 is I will always be dependent on medications. Another one is my physician is the only source of my information and kind of, you know, guidance as to how to heal, which is obviously not true because the thing is most physicians don't even talk about nutrition and lifestyle and those sorts of things, and you have to find that out on your own. Another limiting belief is as I age, you know, I'm going to get sicker, and, you know, chronic disease is a part of aging. That's a limiting belief. That's not necessarily true. It does not have to be true. I have lots of examples of people who have lived into their 60s, 70s, even 80s that are living healthy. And
they're looking a lot better too. That's the other thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. So the thing is, you know, part of cleaning up is cleaning out our subconscious mind. And I'm looking at limiting beliefs, and I dive into that a lot deeper in my book as to how we can overcome those limiting beliefs. And then there's also the emotional aspect, right? So there's the emotional self. And a lot of us have had traumatic experiences when we're younger. Now, these don't have to be major things. I'm not talking necessarily about physical or sexual abuse. I'm talking about even a minor thing, like, say, you grew up in a household, say you were one of 5 children, you had 4 siblings, or even if you only had 3 or 2. Sometimes a child will perceive that they're being neglected, even though they're not, because the other child may be getting more attention by the parent. And in a specific moment, I'm just giving you one example of something that may be perceived as traumatic. And there's all sorts of things we deal with in our lives, both minor and major. You know, major things could be, you know, death of a loved one, divorce, loss of a job, a major move, those sorts of things. And it could be minor things as well, like, you know, arguments with your boss, or, you know, being cut off driving home, or little arguments at home in your relationship or with your kids, with your wife. I mean, lots of minor things. So there's a lot of things that happen in our lives that create, can create these emotional blocks. And the thing is that a lot of those emotional blocks are around negative emotions. And, you know, the thing about negative emotions, whether it's sadness, grief, anger, you know, guilt, shame, whatever it may be, fear, you know, we're not meant to repress those. I mean, we are meant to feel those right to the core. And the thing is that sounds like it could be painful, but it is. It is, but the thing is, those emotions are meant to be felt, because if you repress and suppress them, it turns out they cause suffering over time. So when Ken Wilber talks about cleaning up in my book, I'm talking about that in the way of removing limiting beliefs and subconscious blocks, and removing those emotional blocks as well.
Right. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, it's pretty astounding how the human body has this tremendous capacity for just basically holding things at bay. I mean, it can take on unbelievable amounts of stress before it finally says, I just can't do it anymore.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
And even better so, as you talk about chronic disease and some pretty heavy-duty stuff that people can take on. And then you hear stories, for instance, maybe somebody went to, let's say, a Burning Man celebration. The next thing you know, boom, they just totally spontaneously heal. And it's like, the body's saying, I've been trying to tell you this the whole time, and it took a festival for you to figure this out?
Right. Right. Yeah, because often, these things that happen, these chronic diseases, these illnesses, these conditions I see them as signals or signposts that our body is trying to tell us something. And the whole question is, are we willing to listen? Are we willing to dive deep within to get to the roots of why, we're going through these conditions, right?
So now, how do you like to get started with people when it comes into this, I guess, I call it start inquiry, I guess, is what it is. Yeah.
So that's a very good question. So the thing is that that's still a work in progress, right? Because I'm in the conventional medical world, and I still see patients, and this book has just come out the last 2 months, and it's still a work in progress. So what I do is, when I first meet a patient, I'm kind of trying to figure out what's going on with them. The first thing you have to establish is whether a patient has the intention to heal. Now, it may seem surprising to some of your listeners that someone may not want to heal. I have met a lot of patients that have no intention to heal, and I dive into that in my book as well. I mean, a lot of the reasons could be, number one, they have identified with the victim story and they're not willing to let it go. Another reason could be that the illness gives them some meaning in their life because they don't have any other meaning or purpose. Other reasons I have seen is that guilt, like they may have close family members who are also chronically ill, and they would feel guilty if they were able to overcome that illness. Some people remain stuck in that paradigm because they're lonely. And
here's a big one too. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dive in, but you're kind of right at that cusp where I think this is a valuable one as well. I remember having a guest on the program who decided to go the direction of using Ayurvedic medicine.
Yes.
And she says you'd really be surprised at how light the medicine side is versus the personal well-being side is. In other words, getting at the core truth of things. And she said one of the biggest reasons is she said she was seeing all these specialists, but nothing seemed to work, and it was kind of like she threw her hands into the air and said, I'll at least give this a shot. And she said she had gained an insight, and this was after being in her condition for more than 7 years. And some people, it's even longer than that. That's what I mean. The body is amazing how much it can take before it just can't take it anymore, right? So she says, when I went to this Ayurvedic practitioner, it was almost like a door had opened and a voice came out and says, you don't deserve this. And that's what she began to inquire about. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that subliminal thing or that subtle thing that's down in there. And that's what you're interested in getting to, that once you can click that open, you talk about how people, for instance, they want to be that victim or they want to, this is their identity. I remember a gentleman who was upset when 9/11 had occurred, and somehow he got through the trauma of that, but then he was upset because that was an important moment of history and he was there, that sort of thing. Or, what was the other one I was there was another one I was about to bring up there as well. but it was the whole idea. Oh, it was somebody who was in the, I guess, peak performance, the psychology of peak performance. And I said, so what is it with people that go after the self-help, or they go get the coaching, or they do the weekend seminars and retreats, and yet they want to stay miserable? What's up with that? And she just simply said, because some people just love courting their own misery. That's just the way they want. But I think, but why? Anyway,
right.
And this is how you work with all this.
Yeah, so, we talked about intention, and, some people just don't have the intention to heal. And then in my book, I dive into two important ingredients to solidify your intention. And that is this. The first thing about intention is, one thing I found is that in order for a patient or someone to have the intention to heal, they have to have a deeper meaning or a mission to their life, right? So if I do find someone who has, doesn't have the intention, I start inquiring about that. Have you looked at, why you're here? Because we're all here for a reason, right? I mean, nobody is born without a reason or a greater purpose. It's that the difference is that who knows that and who does not know that, right? So I started asking them questions like, what were your childhood ambitions and your dreams? What were your passions? What can you do now that you can do, for hours on end without noticing the time go by? What do people compliment you on in terms of your skills, talents, and abilities? And then the other question I asked is, if you knew you could not fail, what would you attempt to do, right? And sometimes that is able to create an opening where I help them answer those questions and start to cultivate an intention to heal. And sometimes not. So there's a second part of having an intention, and that is connection. Because if you're healing strictly for yourself, that may not be enough motivation for you to want to heal. But if you see yourself as connected to not only those closest to you, like your family and your close friends, but to your acquaintances and to your community and to humanity as a whole and to nature, then by healing, you are contributing to the greater good, the greater good of the whole. Because by healing yourself, number one, because we are all connected, I mean, that there's a kind of, not a trickle down isn't the right word, but you know what I mean. It's kind of an effect that spreads to others. And also, by healing yourself, you can be of greater service to those close to you, whether it's your family, your friends, or in your workplace, or if you find that greater meaning or mission or calling, you can pursue that. So the thing is, it all starts with intention, and I try to start the conversation by diving into that.
Now, here's something to explore, too. When you talk about living in greater service, I can imagine some listeners out there might be thinking to themselves, okay, well, that sounds great that I'm moving in that direction, that I believe I'm serving humanity in a greater capacity, preferably with the natural-born gifts and talents that I was endowed with. That's the first thing, certainly, to explore is, what is the special reason I'm here? And I remember in a book years and years and years and years ago, I think it was by Deepak Chopra. He says, here's a question to get in the habit of asking your children, and I did, and it sure was fun when I would do this. What is the special reason God put you here? And then, I'd keep my mouth shut, and I would just listen to him. And it was amazing the little journeys kids would take on, because they would actually inspire you, like, I never thought about it that way before. Listen to the kids. I mean, they're a lot more knowledgeable, it seems, than we are, but somebody listening to this would go, oh, live in service. Well, that sounds great. So I'm going to get out there and do this. And then they start taking a look at, for instance, people who have done that, who have become ill. For instance, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who ended up getting diagnosed with leukemia, and here was a guy that was, from my understanding, from a seminar I'd seen him do, was voted to be the third most spiritual person alive. Now, that's a pretty big honor. So what gives there? So no matter what I do, I can just see the listener thinking, but that can still happen. What's up?
Right. So that's a good question. I mean, the thing is that, so to address that, this is what I would say. if you look at who we are, right? The most superficial level I've said is the physical, and the thing is that we are not our bodies, we are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions. These are all aspects of who we are. There is a deeper consciousness that animates who we are. So for some people, for someone who's religious, they would refer to it as soul or spirit. I use consciousness because it doesn't alienate anybody who's not necessarily religious.
Right.
So the thing is, who we are is that underlying consciousness, and it's just like the book, The Course in Miracles says is,
right.
and what it says is that nothing that is real can ever be threatened. Okay, so if you look at the example of Wayne Dyer, someone may look at him and say, he was spiritual, he was this and that, and he still got leukemia, and he passed away. Well, the thing is, though, that leukemia affected his physical body, but we, if we are greater than who we are physically, that means that his consciousness is still there in some way, shape, or form, and it goes on, right? So,
right.
So if you look at who we are in a greater context, death is just an illusion. It's an illusion. It's just the demise of the physical body, but who we truly are goes on. That deeper level of who we are. So that's how I would answer somebody who would, ask me about that example of Wayne Dyer. Why did that happen? Why did he get leukemia and pass away?
Right.
And I believe that happened to him because this was meant to teach us that deeper lesson. Like his whole life was an example for all of us, right? And it's not that he didn't face his own struggles and his own challenges, in his marriage or with his kids or otherwise, right? So the thing is that this is not about, it's not that when you say, I don't like using the word enlightenment, but let's just use that as an example. If someone were to get enlightened, does it mean that they no longer have any challenges, any adversity, any obstacles? No. All it means is that you have a greater understanding of why those things are happening to you, and you're able to navigate them with greater ease.
And you bring up something that I think is really important to address and to certainly bring attention to, and that is, the idea, well, if I move in this direction, life should become this way. For instance, I remember someone I knew probably about 15 years ago. She was real frustrated in life, and she decided, well, I'm going to start going to church, and started celebrating becoming a Christian and all these sort of things. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like just not even 2 months later, she says, I'm going to church every Sunday, and quite frankly, I don't feel any happier. And the only thing I thought was, and I asked her, and I said, so what made you think going to church every Sunday was going to make you happier? And I could see probably the frustration. I don't remember that I ever actually got an answer from that, but it really wasn't to be answered. It was more of a question for her to think about, why am I actually doing this? Mm-hmm. And you can see, for instance, how people would look at Wayne Dyer and say, why did this happen to him? I thought he was doing it all right. Now, another example is a pretty big one as well. You've got Anthony Robbins. A lot of people know who that name is. He's got a wonderful Netflix special on there, but here was a guy who was diagnosed with a tumor. And I say to people, look, the problem I think today, or let's say the challenge, if you will, is with all the immediate gratification of information. In fact, my wife and I have been enjoying the series Glee, which is a lot of fun to watch, but what you see too much, even in a show like that, even with all of the nuances of the high school relationships, is the end result of what takes hours and hours and hours of committed practice. So we look at stars, for instance, movie stars, or we look at athletes, and we get to enjoy the end result of a tremendous amount of work.
Yes.
And the thing about it is that as we look at these end results, we think to ourselves, okay, well, if I go ahead and start doing this, that should be my end result, and that should be sustainable. And I say, really? Well, here's a way you might want to explore that particular attitude. Start reading biographies and autobiographies, and you will find these people struggled as much, if not way more than you did, and that starts making you feel very encouraged that the life you have isn't so bad.
Right. No, that's an interesting point. I mean, sorry, there's just an announcement.
It sounds like we've got a little distraction, but it actually sounds pretty cool because it's only spiritual enlightenment that would actually bring us to that point. I remember
exactly.
There was a time I had a guy who was coming in and he was talking about a book, and this was somebody I had in studio back in the in-studio days, and it was How to Get Rich, or How to Become Filthy, Stinking Rich and Still Have Time for Great Sex was the title of his book. And there was a point I was kind of detecting, and it probably was just something I observed, but a feeling of arrogance from him, okay?
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then all of a sudden there was a point in the show where he started getting choked up, as though he got that dry cough in his throat. And I said, you'll have to just kind of bear with our guest. I think he got a little too much money stuck in his throat. I just couldn't help myself. And then there was, do you remember a guy by the name of Michael Shermer?
I haven't heard. I've heard. I don't know him.
Yeah, he's a guy. He's known as a skeptic. Wrote Skeptic magazine, and he challenges. And he had a book as How to Know God, for instance. And he says, guys, look, we're hardwired to know God, but does God really exist? Is the question he's asking. And so during our conversation, all of a sudden his cell phone rang, and during the interview, and I thought I couldn't help myself, and I said, "That's God calling," and I think he's a little pissed about your last statement.
Yeah.
I couldn't help myself. But that's what we're also talking about, too, is that humor approach to life, that thing that we lost when we were children that we had in abundance, and now all of a sudden life gets in there, we get disappointments and think things should be this way, and they become that way, and really beginning to explore these things.
Right. What was the question you asked, Daniel, just before?
Well, the question is that people tend to look at certainty and how you can actually help to perhaps or encourage people to guide themselves to explore that, I guess, a lot more and start exploring these things within themselves that I think disappointment is one of those really good emotions that say this is something that needs to be looked at, needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, regarding the issue of certainty, one of the chapters in my book is embracing uncertainty. And what I talk about there is that, often, we go through life with certain expectations and certain goals, and we expect things to go a certain way. But we all know that that's not the journey most of us take. There's that old saying that life is what happens when we're making other plans. And the thing is that we truly need to embrace uncertainty in our lives. And the way I apply this to illness is that, the reason you need to, when you are resisting uncertainty or the unknown, often you're thrust into an illness as something that you didn't expect, in order to remind you that you need to embrace the unknown, because then this gets thrust on you as an unknown and you don't know how it's going to progress, number one. Number two, the energy that you use to resist the uncertainty or the unknown, you need that energy in order to stay healthy. And the thing is, I talk about, getting out of our comfort zones. Embracing the unknown or embracing uncertainty is really about getting out of your comfort zone, because it is out of our comfort zone and only in that space that true growth occurs. That we grow, we learn, we explore, we discover our skills, our talents, our abilities, and it is only through that uncertainty and the challenges that uncertainty brings that we can truly accomplish something wonderful in our lives, however we may define that.
Right.
We're not talking. It could be something just personal. It could be something for the community. It could be something to make a major global impact. It can be any of those things. But embracing uncertainty or the unknown is an integral part of the healing process in my book. But it is probably one of the final stages, because there's a lot of different steps that we need to go through before we get to that final step.
Right. And I certainly can agree with you when it comes to living in service, and I suppose a recommendation, and certainly we can explore this a little bit because I think this is a fascinating way to approach what we're talking about here today, is when you see on the news the unemployment rate has risen, people are scrambling and looking for jobs, the ones they're getting don't seem to pay enough that they can even afford to stay in their homes, the cost of living is going through the roof. I mean, there's a whole gamut of things the news would have you believe, and you can certainly question that. But let's say that you become one of these people, perhaps a victim if you want to. I just lost my job. Well, here's what happened many years ago when that happened to me. I said, well, I'm collecting a little bit of unemployment, so that buys me a bit of time to get out there and find something. But what I decided to do is not be in such a hurry to do that at that point. What I chose to do is, why don't I go volunteer somewhere? And I am a firm believer in volunteering, and trust me, folks, there are volunteer opportunities in just about every conceivable arena you can even think of. There just is, especially in America. Yeah. So I decided to go to the neighborhood, what was called Neighborhood House, and they said, well, what would you like to do here? And I said, how about if I just help people put together emergency food baskets? Truth of the matter is, I was someone in that position, that needed, a food stamp and emergency food. Now, my first thoughts almost were, gee whiz, this is beneath me. I'm not going to accept charity from anybody. But then I thought, but wait a minute, in a way, don't you pay taxes for those particular things to occur? Why not use it if you need it? So I thought, okay, that makes sense. But what was amazing to me is I was at this neighborhood house, and I was helping to put these food baskets together for people who were coming in. I was truly astounded at what I was seeing. We're talking middle and upper middle class people, or people that certainly look that way. They didn't look like the kind of people you thought would be coming into this place. So this volunteer opportunity actually began to have me explore my thoughts and attitudes surrounding things such as charity. And those are those underlying things you're talking about too, aren't you?
Well, it is, because, the thing is, when anything happens in our lives, right, I mean, it's all about perception. A job loss could be perceived as a negative thing, or it could be looked at as an opportunity to truly explore what really you're passionate about, your interests, what your greater calling is. Or to explore other career opportunities, or to take time just to focus on yourself, or to help out a family member who's in need, or to help out a friend, right? So, any situation or event in your life can be interpreted in more than one way, and it's just a matter of how we look at those situations. The same goes for a loss of a relationship. End of a relationship could be something that's devastating. Or it could be looked at, that the relationship has taken its course, it's served its purpose, and now it's time to move on. I'm not saying it's not going to be painful, that you're not going to suffer grief. Of course you are, if you've been with that person for a long time. But you need to feel those feelings, feel those emotions, whatever that loss that you're perceiving, but look to what lies on the other side, right? And it could be incredible opportunity, or incredible potential. I think that the whole thing of embracing uncertainty is truly about seeing the potential that lies in every single moment of our lives.
You certainly would be surprised at what you're capable of doing, especially if you're or put yourself into an uncertain situation. Like, wow, I didn't know I was able to do something like that.
Exactly. Right. You'd be surprised what you're capable of. Yeah.
What do you think about environments? For instance, you move from one place into another, and all of a sudden you're taking on these physical things. Like, what's going on here? Is it possible that you can actually take on an energy of an environment that can cause or perhaps make you feel like you're getting ill, or feeling things that you're just not used to feeling as a result of energy that already exists?
Right. So I can't say that I'm an expert in this area.
Well, we're not certainly looking for expertise. Just the idea that there's a possibility of it. Yes.
So the thing is that everything is energy, right? I mean, if you break us down to our fundamental parts, we're made of atoms, which are made of subatomic particles, which are all mainly energy. I mean, we're 99.9999% empty space. So everything is energy. And the thing is that I do believe that, you can sense that energy if you're open to it. And I believe, yes, I mean, you could be in a place that has, you just don't feel right, or there's something off, there's something amiss. A lot of people call that intuition, but I think intuition is essentially just tuning into our energy, right? So I do believe that, those things can be perceived, and we can hone our intuition, we can develop that aspect of who we are, and, use that, to guide ourselves in our lives. So, yeah, I think that is possible.
Now, ultimately, I know, I would suspect that your book could also move into people to awakening to, well, what is your greater good? What was the special reason that you were put here for? Perhaps in the next few minutes here, as we get ready to wrap up the show, perhaps you can give our listeners an idea of maybe a step they can take, or maybe an exercise or two that they can consider that can help getting them to do that personal inquiry, because this is what a lot of this is about, is let's dive deep into who you are and why you come to believe and think the way you do, and is it working for you? Certainly, if you're not feeling good physiologically, then perhaps this is something to explore. Let's go ahead and talk about that.
So, yeah, I can start talking about, like the first step in my healing process, which is setting the intention. So before you can start on that journey, you have to set the intention to heal. And we did talk about this earlier, but it's useful to go over it again. You have to have the intention to heal. And like I said earlier, a lot of people don't have the intention to heal. But I think one of the most important ingredients to have the intention is to have a greater meaning or mission or calling for your life. And in my book, I go into a whole series of questions that you can ask. And those are, what were your childhood ambitions and dreams? What are the skills, talents, and abilities that people compliment you on? Or who are the people who that you admire for what they have done or what they can accomplish?
Right. What are you drawn to, in other words, yes.
Exactly. And what can you do that seems timeless, meaning time can pass and you have no realization that the time has passed? And the most important question in that realm is, if you knew you could not fail, what would you attempt to do? Because, when you look at failure, I mean, often people see failure as devastating. For me, failure is just course correction. That you've tried something, you've tried to accomplish a goal, you didn't succeed, but there's a message there, right? So if you're open, there's a message there for you. And life is always giving us messages. Right. It's just who listens and who does not listen. And that's my approach to illness as well. Illness is telling you something about yourself that you have yet to learn or discover or uncover. So I would start with setting the intention and truly exploring your greater reason for being here. Because I can tell you the majority of people have no idea what it is, and they're not living it. And that's just from my experience.
And that's why we're inspired by people like athletes. You see them do these phenomenal things, but it's like, look at the work they put in. You've got to love, for instance, if you're an NBA player just sitting on the bench, you've really got to love the game, because what these guys go through is just, they're starting now recruiting these guys at 2 years old almost. That's a lifetime of basketball going on there. But that being said, it may not seem fun, and it's not guaranteed to be fun, certainly not guaranteed to be easy, but it is fun and easy when you overcome the obstacles and you get to where you believe you want to go. And besides, if it was easy, you probably wouldn't be happy about it anyway. I'm remembering an old episode of The Twilight Zone where this guy was a two-bit hustler hood. He ends up dying in a stick-up or something like that, and so he goes to a place that would seem like paradise. He's rolling the dice and he's winning every time. He's got hot women on his arms just pretty much 24/7, Every time he places a bet, he's winning. And it goes on and on and on, and finally he finds himself frustrated. He says, and you realize you're in hell. So hell would be a place that would give you everything you want easily. And who wants that?
Right, exactly. We think we want that, but eventually we discover that that's not what we really want.
Exactly. So, Dr. Naeem, could you go ahead and give out a website and how people can find out more about how to get your book, Healing from the Inside Out?
So my book is available at all major bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Chapters, Indigo. It's also available on Amazon.com. If you want to know more about me, you can go to my website. It's naumannaeem.com, NAUMANNAEEM.com, and there you can get more information about me. There's a blog there. I do a twice monthly blog. And you can sign up for my email list where you can get more information on a regular basis about health and healing and stress management and lots of other topics I discussed. There's also a section where you can listen to other radio shows I've done and interviews I've done. And there's also information about my coaching services if anyone wants to inquire. So, I encourage everyone to go to my website, explore, and sign up if you want to know more.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I really enjoyed this.
Very good. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also stretch your horizons by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We'll have posts there, when it comes to healing from the inside out. And you can also discover more as we post this up on our YouTube channel at 50 Beyond. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.